This podcast is brought to you by Bonus Room Productions and We Own This Town.
I am Jason T. Meares, Esquire.
And I'm Kelly Hoyle Bolick.
And we are DIMAS Today. All right, Kelly. How's it going, man?
JT, here we are, my friend. Monumental moment for us.
I know. On the precipice of oblivion. Together.
That's right. The last anchor left in my life.
Oh, just gonna float away forever. Oh man, what a journey this has been.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah.
First, we want to say hello to our listeners. We want to apologize for being away for a while. I had to go away for a while.
But came back with some big stuff, some good stuff. We got this. We're not going to call it the final episode, but we're going to call it probably the final episode. So, 1, thank you all for listening forever. 2, just to get out in front of this, you're about to hear kind of the white whale of what we've been trying to do, our interview with Ed Solomon.
It's a perfect bookend, really, for this whole podcast. If you guys can remember, way back when, 2 or 3 years ago, I don't even know now.
Yeah.
Like the last year was 5 years, so who knows?
Right.
But we started this thing... not even with the goal of getting interviews, and with a little push from our producer Michael. The first interview we landed was with Chris Matheson, and
we reordered that to be our first episode. So the fact that we started with Chris and we were ending with Ed is just, oh man, it makes my heart so full.
It's perfect.
And I'll say, Ed was the very first person we reached out to, and he emailed us back within 15 minutes. Was like, love to do it, guys. Let's find the time. And then it took 3 years to actually find the time, but we did it. And big props to Ed and to Michael to carry us over, get us where we needed to go.
Ed, a little busy, guy's got a lot going on.
Yeah.
And he's been putting out great work in the interim. Man, he couldn't have been more gracious. And, he was in his apartment. It was in the evening. We were here. I felt like there were some feels, we were opening up to each other. It was a really great time.
Man, I loved it. I loved it so much. So let's get to the interview. And then afterwards, let's circle back and talk a little bit about the interview and the show.
Sounds good. Here's Ed Solomon.
Excellent!
Ed Solomon, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad to be on. And I can't tell you how thrilled I am that you even exist.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
We're thrilled you exist as well.
I'm kind of happy about that too, given I was a student at one point.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I want to start back at the beginning of your career, if that's all right. And we'll get to the Bill and Ted stuff later. But you started out pretty young, doing stand-up, and you got into writing jokes. Is that right?
I started thinking I wanted to be a stand-up comic, going to the Comedy Store on my first night in LA, driving down with my mother from Northern California, going to open mic at the Comedy Store in Westwood, having a good set, which made me think, oh, forget it. I'm not going to go to UCLA. I'm just going to be a comic. Inviting every single person I knew from high school who was at UCLA to come see me the next week, where I bombed so badly that I felt worse for the people who came to see me than I did for myself, because they had to basically walk the mile back with me to my apartment, or basically to our dorms or wherever they were living. And they had to figure out what to say to me afterward. And I decided, okay, no more stand-up. I'm going to be an econ major, and, that's it. And then about a year later, this girl that I had a giant crush on was touring UCLA, and she wanted to go to the Comedy Store. So I went with her thinking, oh my God, when I walk in, they're going to stone me or not let me in because of the bomb I had a year ago, as if 7,000 open mic comedians hadn't been through in a year, right? Doing 2-minute bits. But I went in, and of course, nobody, had any idea, of course, who I was, that I had bombed a year ago. And a comedian there, I overheard saying that Jimmy Walker was looking for writers, and Jimmy Walker performed that night. And so I went up to him afterwards and I said, hey, do you need writers? I don't know what I was thinking. I think I was thinking, when he was performing, I thought, or when I was watching the comedians perform, I thought, maybe I could write that stuff. Because I had written jokes in high school. That's what I had performed the year before, Mm-hmm. And he said, we're always looking for writers, or however his voice was at that time. He patted me on the head, I remember, and he gave me a phone number and an address. of a guy named Gene Braunstein, who was his creative manager at that time, head writer. And I went back to the dorms that night, and on that, remember that onion skin typing paper that you could erase as you type? I remember writing, Dear Mr. Walker, enclosed, please find 22 jokes. No, Dear Mr. Braunstein, enclosed, please find 22 jokes for your and Mr. Walker's perusal. I remember writing that. And I mailed these jokes in, and then I got a letter back, I don't know, a few weeks later saying they bought 2 jokes. And I was like, oh my God. And then I used to go to the Comedy Store and bring a date and watch Jimmy Walker perform a joke I wrote, and then go backstage and try to impress the date by introducing him to Jimmy Walker. And I remember one time he said to this girl that I had brought, you got to come to the Comedy Store. You got to meet Jimmy Walker. You got all these good things. And I was like, I think he's trying to help me get laid, which, by the way, he didn't ultimately succeed. So I need to talk to him about that.
That's perfect.
Yeah, but I started there. And then I wrote a bunch of jokes for a while and, started doing stand-up and met a lot of great friends at UCLA. And one of them was Chris, that I met not through stand-up, but through trying to get into writing classes, because I was an economics major. And because I wasn't a film major, I couldn't get in any screenwriting classes, but I was able to get into a playwriting class. And that's where I met Chris.
Nice. That's very cool. And at the time, so I'm just trying to jive this. You were also in college. You started writing for Lavergne Shirley, right? Had you met Chris before then, or after, or how did that?
I met Chris before, and Chris and I became great friends at that time. And we laughed and laughed and laughed, and we started doing some improv together. But mostly, Chris had directed a play. How Chris and I got to be really good friends was I wrote a play that was actually a drama that Chris directed, and he did an incredible job with it. He did a great job with it, but we started to develop our sense of humor together, or at least our shared sense of humor, during auditions for the play, where we started just trashing the play that we were doing to ourselves.
Okay, yeah.
Making fun of ourselves. I remember a moment where we were holding auditions in I think it was like a makeup room, or it was some room that was walled with mirrors. And I remember us both each other, or noticing that we were each, rather than looking at the person who was auditioning, looking at ourselves in the mirror. And for some reason, we started laughing about that. I just remember that moment. And then we just began a process of making fun of ourselves and making fun of the play that we were doing. Again, Chris directed it as a drama, and it was a dramatic play that worked, but we laughed so much trashing ourselves and trashing the process of doing it, that we just became great friends at that time. And then my senior year, the joke writing combined with a different play that I had written. I'd written a comedy play. And I was writing, one of the comedians I was writing for was Gary Shandling by then. And Gary introduced me to a TV producer named Mark Sotkin, who came to see one of the plays, that specific, the comedy one that I'd written, and hired me as a staff writer on Lavergne Shirley. And I was absolutely unprepared for that. Professionally, I was not even close to being ready. Going from being a guy writing jokes in the dorms and occasionally punching up a comedian set or selling a joke here or 2 jokes there, to being in a room with professional comedy writers around a table, trying to having to churn out these scripts weekly. I was okay. I wasn't great. I was okay. I was no wunderkind. I was just a contributing staff writer, and I wrote a couple episodes. But that was incredibly difficult for me and sort of fried me and was depressing. And it stoked a giant fear, which was, I don't know if I have it. I don't know if I have what it takes to be a pro. And that led to, because I didn't get hired, Mark didn't bring me onto another show. I didn't get hired, into another season on another show. I was pitching some ideas. I was writing for some game shows, and Chris had written a couple of brilliant, really, really funny parody scripts. And I had written a mediocre spec about something or other, screenplay. And I remember saying to Chris, hey, what if we wrote something together? And by that time, Chris and I had been doing improv together with 3 other friends, Ryan Rowe, Mark Sandrowski, and Mark Jaffe. We had formed an improv group that performed at a theater in LA without an audience. We didn't want an audience. We just wanted to work out. And I imagine when you guys had Chris on, you might have talked about this.
Yeah.
But like we were just working out to work out. And that's where the characters came up. It was Chris. Chris said, hey, what if we do 2 guys who know nothing about history, studying history? And we started with Bill, Ted, and there was a guy named Bob as well, actually. That was one. And there was, I remember, one of Ted's dad. Ted's last name was originally Williams, and Ted's dad was played by Mark Sandrowski. And there was a guy named Rufus, who at that moment was like some kind of like a high school. I think he was like a 27-year-old. I don't remember what Rufus was in the improv, but there was a guy named Rufus played by Mark Jaffe. Chris and I loved playing these voices. We just loved being in the heads of these guys. So afterwards, we went out to a coffee shop and kept doing Bill and Ted. And for a year, we just messed around as Bill and Ted without any idea of putting them in anything. It never even crossed our mind to put them in anything. And it was funny because we both were writers and we were both wanting to be comedy writers, but it never crossed our mind to like strip mine these characters or any characters and put them in something. But when it came time to write something together, we were like, what should we write? And we thought, what if we did Bill and Ted as a movie? And that's how that started.
Wow, that is really cool. The script, I know there was some production delay, or the release was delayed and whatnot, but from like when you started writing the script with Chris to actually pitching it and somebody saying, yeah, let's go ahead and do this, how long did that process take?
We didn't pitch it.
Really?
We sat down, we decided that we wanted to do Bill and Ted as a movie. I remember Chris was in grad school in San Diego. I was post Lavergne Shirley in my apartment in Westwood, because I remember an early conversation where Chris was doing notes. I still have the notes, but we were on the phone. He was in San Diego. I remember being on the floor because I didn't have a bed frame. I only had a mattress on the floor. And I remember lying on the floor laughing as we were talking about Bill and Ted. What if they were responsible for everything bad that ever happened in history? That's what I remember. And I remember us imagining them with Abraham Lincoln when he got shot, at the Titanic when it sank, like all these things that went wrong, somehow Bill and Ted causing, and that was cracking us up, which led to us thinking about the way Bill and Ted would talk to great people and the way they wouldn't differentiate them at all. Like the way they wouldn't, Abraham Lincoln, Sigmund Freud, they both had beards. That was what they were both bearded guys. There's no difference otherwise. And we realized pretty quickly that we can't have them responsible for the Holocaust. We can't have them responsible for, like, that's bad. That's just be good. So why are they juxtaposed with these great people? And that led us to the history report idea. Like, what if they have a history report and somehow if they flunk it, they'll get separated, and they don't want to get separated because we didn't have the idea that their band would save the world at that point. It was like they'd be separated was the big jeopardy. Ted would go to military school, so they can't be separated. So what if they have to pass a history report, and they have to go back in time to pass the history report, which led to this idea of what if Rufus drives a van that goes back in time? And Rufus, as I think Chris might have said, I don't know, but Rufus was originally a 27-year-old high school sophomore who had, and we never explained why, other than he probably was a complete stoner. I'm sure he was a stoner in our first imagination, even though Bill and Ted, in the movies, they don't do any drugs, but in our original inception of them, they pretended to do drugs. I don't know if they actually did do drugs.
I can see
Chris
that.
and I wrote a lot of letters back and forth as as Ted and Ted's older brother, Dan. And I know Dan was a giant stoner. We used to have them. I don't know if I still have those letters, but Rufus in the original inception drove a van that went through time, and we never explained why. And he had a dog, I remember, named Dog Rufus. And Bill and Ted just went back in time and collected these historical figures for their report. That was the original draft. And then we finished it and we wrote it on spec. What happened was we in like March of 84 and April of 84, and then maybe July of 84, we did some notes. And in July, my parents were up at Lake Tahoe and we went to go stay with them in a cabin there. And every day for like 3 or 4 days, we went into Tahoe City and we started outlining what became the movie. And then we came back to LA and I guess maybe at Ships. I think we spent a lot of time at Ships and at Norm's and at Dolores's. Those were all coffee shops in Westwood. Just blasting through a rough handwritten draft of the script and laughing and not really knowing anything about film structure. And I remember one moment where Chris looked at me across the table and he's like, maybe someone will read this script. That was like our big dream. Someone will read it. Oh my God. And then I also remember, and this is interesting given that I'm now a 60-year-old man and, spent 12 years trying to get Bill and Ted Face the Music off the ground. I remember us saying during that period, imagine how pathetic it'll be if we're 30 and we're still writing Bill and Ted. God, how wrong we were.
That's great.
But I remember then we finished a rough draft, hand-typed on 2 different typewriters, and it was missing something. I don't remember why we felt that, but then we said, because I remember we were at Ships in Westwood, and I remember it was late at night because it was dark out, because I remember the moment where we were like, what if it's not just that they'll be separated, but what if their music is will save the world 700 years in the future? And because there was some issue, I think what we were realizing was the movie is basically set in reality and there's a science fiction element to it, which is a time travel. But what is the reality of a van that time travels? That didn't feel real given the physics of the movie that we'd set up. Mm-hmm. So we were like, what if they come from the future? So what if Rufus is from the future? And that led to this idea of like, what if their music saves the world in the future, which led to the Rufus comes from the future in a van. And the script was then called Bill and Ted's Time Van. And that was our first draft. Rufus drives a big green van. He comes from the future. In the future, their music saves the world. That led to the scene in the future. And that led to Be Excellent to Each Other and Party On Dudes, which we wrote at Ships in Westwood. Wow. And we didn't think that was very important. I remember when we were writing it, we were like, what would they say? Be excellent to each other, party on dudes. Okay. And we just kept going. We didn't realize that would land like it landed in a way. And then we turned that script into my agents who hated it and begged us to not send it out, which led to us having no agent.
Wow.
which led to back to the Lavergne Shirley, which was a younger agent named David Greenblatt who had actually who had wanted to sign me 2 years earlier on Lavergne Shirley, but instead I went with a fancy famous agent, which was a big mistake, who didn't give a shit, honestly. They never got our movie. We were then fired from that agency, and I gave that script I said to David Greenblatt, would you be interested in reading this? And he said, of course. And he read it, and he liked it. And he brought it. He was just moving over to CAA, and it was David Greenblatt whose enthusiasm got the script out to people. And that got us, and we got the script optioned for $5,000. And we were paid $15,000 to rewrite it, which was for us fantastic.
Yeah.
For Interscope Communications. It was a guy named Robert Court bought it. And that got set up at Warner Brothers. And that really began our film career, basically, at that point. So that's how that all started.
Before we move forward, you mentioned Gary Shandling. So what was it like working on the Gary Shandling show? Because I'm a huge fan of that show, and I would love to have any input or anything at all about Gary.
Thank you for seeing it. So, because nobody saw that show. I mean, that was Gary's first show. Nobody saw.
I remember watching it on my dad's satellite television when I was younger, like messing around with the knobs and seeing it in the weird stagey set, and then just being transfixed that somebody could do that on television.
Oh God. Thank you so much. Nobody saw it. It was on 2 networks and nobody saw it. It was on Showtime and Fox and nobody saw it. It was I want to say 86, maybe it was 87, 86, 87. Gary said, "Hey, I'm going to do a TV show. Here's the idea for the pilot. Do you have any interest?" And I remember actually going, "Oh, I think this is awesome." Mm-hmm. And Gary, who had been a giant mentor for me, and again, as we said, he helped me get on that. I mean, he was responsible for me meeting Mark, who hired me for that show. And he was the first person who ever said, if you really want to write, you can. You could be a writer. And he was extremely critical, which was great. Mm-hmm. That first comedy, the first time I met him was at UCLA, doing stand-up at UCLA when we used to hire in the comedy club at UCLA, which was a group of student comedians. We'd hire a pro to come in and do the headlining. And Gary said to me, you have 2 good jokes in your set and the rest you can throw away. Do you want to understand why? And I was like, yeah. And then he said, would you be interested in writing? Because you could write. And I was like, yeah. And that's how so Gary was really the first adult, the first grown-up, the first professional who had given me any encouragement, really, So now, what is it, 7 years later, Gary says, I've got a show. Would you like to work on it? I'm going to do the show. And I was, yeah. So the original 4 writers were Gary, Alan Zweibel, who was just a wonderful man and a brilliantly funny guy. He had just come off of Saturday Night Live. Mm-hmm. Jack Burns, old school comedian from Burns and Schreiber, and a sweetheart of a man who was a client of Bernie Brillstein, who had put him on the show, and me. And we were like, well, what is this show? It's a show about a guy named Gary Shandling who has a TV show called It's Gary Shandling's Show. So it's a TV show about a guy who has a TV show. And he speaks to the audience. And the physics of the show were he's the only one who knows he's on TV and everyone else doesn't. So the rules for everyone else were different than the rules for Gary. And we were just making it up as we were going along. And because nobody was paying any attention to it, we could do whatever we wanted. And we were in that lucky place where we were making all sorts of tremendously bad decisions based on our inexperience and inability to actually complete a good story arc. Sure. That we were getting credit for breaking molds, when in fact we were writing ourselves literally into a corner. Like we would literally write ourselves into a corner of the set. And then I remember Vic Kaplan, our line producer, going, you don't have any more money. We can't build another set. And we'd be like, but we have 2 more scenes. He's like, we can't do it. And we'd be like, well, what do we do? So Gary would say something like, see this shoebox? This is the set, and then we just go, pretend I'm in here. And then they just stand in a blank space. And we thought we fucked ourselves so much. But critics thought, oh, look how brilliant they are, because they gave us the benefit of the doubt for a while.
Man, but
they were wrong to, but they did. Yeah. We just literally didn't know what we just we were having a lot of fun, and there were some wonderful writers that came in on that show. Some of the funniest people I've ever met, way funnier than I could ever be, like Max Pross and Tom Gamble and Al Jean and Mike Reese. And there was just a whole slew of tremendously funny people that I learned so much from, who could get to those jokes in ways that I would never be able to. But we would laugh. And one of the big lessons I learned from that show was, when you base a story on a conceit or a concept of the show, like something about Gary breaking the 4th wall, or something that broke the physics of the show would suck. But if you would base it on an emotional truth and then let the conceptual strangeness grow out of the emotional truth, the show would work better. So that was a big lesson I took from that. But that was a fun experience. And it's a rarity, because I felt like we were just playing. I mean, we were working our asses off, and we were there till 3, 4 in the morning. I remember sleeping at the office many nights, like sleeping in the coffee room or on some couch and getting up and having to keep going. It was crazily neurotic, very poorly run, very we had no idea what we were doing, but we were laughing.
Yeah.
And that laughing was driving us. And I was young. There's a funny, when I was on Lavergne Shirley, day one or week one of the head writers comes in and says, every day, 3:00 is nap time. We have to do 22 shows in 22 weeks. So between 3 and 3:30, phones are off, everyone naps. And then we come back at 3:30 and we work until late at night. And every day at nap time on Lavergne and Shirley, I'd go into my office and I'd try to take a nap, but I couldn't sleep. And I would lie on my couch and I'd be absolutely convinced that I was going to be fired. And I wouldn't sleep for a minute. And I'd come back into the room and everyone would be all awake having napped. And like, I was like, they can nap, I can't nap. And they'd have all this energy and they'd go till 3, 4 in the morning. I got a dual check at one point, maybe 15 years ago for like $60. And I called this guy, the head writer, and I said, hey, let me take you to lunch. And we're talking about various things in our now adult life. And I was talking about meditation and how it had helped me. And I was like, I wish I had meditated during nap time. I could have really, really utilized nap time better. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, nap time. You said nap time. And he's like, I don't understand. And I said, do you remember when you made an announcement to the whole staff that we were doing naps at 3:00? And he's like, no. And I was like, what are you talking about? I went into my office every day at 3 to try to nap. And he's like, napped? And then he looks at me and he goes, Ed, we weren't napping. We were doing coke. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I knew the entire season. I thought I was like, that's why you had all the energy. Then the reason I bring this up is then I'm on Gary Shandling's show. And there was a moment, and the show, the first season was shooting very close to my apartment or where I lived. So there was a moment in mid-afternoon, we'd do a run through and then like the hires up would get the notes and all that. There was usually like an hour between the run through and when we had to actually start rewriting. So I used to quickly get home. I would run around Silver Lake. I would take a quick shower and I'd come back to the office. I found out at the end of the season, I can't remember if it was Tom and Max or whether it was Mike and Al, that said to me, we just assumed I'd come back flushed, like my face was red, right? They're like, we thought you were leaving to do coke. That was so funny. The entire season, they thought I was, because I'd come back and I'd be all like energized. And I actually had a thing where I would sit at the rewrite table, I would sit on the top of my chair, like up, I know we're on audio, so people can't see it, but I'd sit on the back of the chair because if I sat too low in the chair, I don't know, I just didn't have the energy. So I'd sit up on my chair. They just thought I was completely coked out of my head, and I never was.
Well, they'd heard all those rumors from Lavergne and Shirley, I'm sure.
From Lavergne and Shirley. Well, he's from Lavergne and Shirley. Clearly, he must be just coked out of his mind.
Oh, man. Oh, that's fantastic.
But no. A friend of mine, a wonderful director named Fred Skepsy, his motto was always, if you're going to get blamed for it, do it. But I never did it. I just got blamed for it, I guess. And then I didn't do it when everyone else was doing it. Oh, well, thank God, by the way.
Right.
I would have.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't be making Bill and Ted Face the Music.
No, I wouldn't be anywhere now. Honestly, I'm thank God, actually. Yeah. For a lot of reasons, thank God, because that's a path that would not work out well for me.
Well, speaking of cocaine,
of course, as you do, yeah.
When you started making Excellent Adventure, one of the great things I've loved about all three of the movies are the musician cameos. Is that something that maybe Steve Herrick or other folks that kind of helped push, I guess, the music theme to become, I don't know, the sort of centerpiece that it is now? We
didn't really have in the first movie any way to get anyone interested because it was just this stupid little low budget indie movie that starring two people no one had ever heard of that was like stupid, like it was like, what? High school kids doing what? And I remember, and Martha Davis, we got three people. Martha Davis, who was Chris's mother-in-law.
Oh, all right. Did not know that.
Yeah, but I don't. But Martha wasn't Chris's mother-in-law then.
Okay.
Actually, Chris met his wife, who's Trish, who's just and they've been married since on the set of Bill and Ted. So Martha was already involved. But we had known Martha through a social circle. Some friends of ours had known Marcia and known the kids, and somehow Martha agreed to do it, and then somehow I think she got fee waiver from the Tubes, I think. And somehow somebody got Clarence Clemens. And I was like, Clarence Clemens, honestly, when I met him, my knees were shaking because I was such a Bruce fan and had seen him in so many concerts already by then.
Right.
But no, we were not, getting musicians was not easy on the first one. And on the second one, it wasn't that easy. Like, I don't know why Jim Martin decided to do it. And we got some other bands, but on Face the Music, it was a little easier, but our budget was so fucked on Face the Music.
Sure.
We had so little money that we really struggled because we couldn't fly anyone in. Mm-hmm. Like, we were like, would you be interested in coming and, hey, musician who normally flies in private jets, how'd you like to take a Southwest flight that stops in Philadelphia and brings you to New Orleans? We didn't have a very attractive proposal.
Right.
But you also had the cultural cachet, right? I mean, like, people who were into Bill and Ted would have dropped everything to be there to be in Bill and Ted.
Well, and at least you were in New Orleans, right? So you had.
We did have that offer, but even I can say now, I wasn't able to say at the time, but okay. So for those of you who haven't seen the movie, well, you know what? Fuck you again. So Dave Grohl's in the movie, and he has a cameo. And if you can see it, you deserve to have this spoiler. I don't even need to say it. So Dave Grohl, we couldn't even get him to New Orleans. We couldn't figure out a schedule, and we couldn't figure out a budget to get him there. So we shot his scene without him. And when they look out at Dave Grohl, they just looked out at a green screen. And then in LA, after we were done shooting, we just shot Dave Grohl. Like, they just shot Dave Grohl against a green screen.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So what Dean shot was, he shot a plate, which is the word for, a still photo basically of the background set of Bill and Ted's point of view out the door of the so-called, quote, Dave Grohl mansion. And then in LA, they just shot Dave Grohl against a green screen going, who are you guys? And what are you doing at my house? And he was great. It took 10 minutes. It was like the easiest thing in the world. That's how that happened. And getting him to agree to do it was fantastic. And he couldn't have been nicer. And he was great, by the way. But we had more people interested in being in Face the Music. We just couldn't afford to get them there in a way that was comfortable. Not even... nobody was saying, you got to fly me private. It was just wait, it's going to be such a pain in the ass. I'm so sorry. We don't have any money. And we just didn't have any money. And, that's where Dean Pariseau stepped up you can't believe, because the movie looks like it cost 5 times what it actually cost,
Sure.
Yeah.
I know when we had a great interview a while back with Laura Shapiro, friend of yours.
She's terrific, yeah.
She was great, and she talked to us a little bit about your relationship with Steven Soderbergh and how, he had a hand in helping you guys there towards the end, I think, when the funding wasn't looking so great.
Yeah, I've learned so much from him, and I'm just, this chapter of my life / career, about to start my 4th thing with him.
Nice.
And we had done this HBO thing called Mosaic that not a lot of people saw, but it was a 6-episode thing on HBO that he had directed. But Steven was like, why are you guys having problems getting this movie made? And I'm like, I know, I would think we could. We've been trying for 10 years, 11 years. So Steven was like, this is bullshit. And I gave him the script, and he made calls on our behalf. And I remember him calling MGM going, what are you guys doing? Why aren't you making this? And he was really helpful there. But where he was incredibly helpful too was in post-production, because he's an incredible editor as well, was just being kind of a godfather in a certain way for it. He wasn't on set or anything like that, but he really helped us he stepped in very key areas where we really needed his help. He helped us in certain marketing things. He helped us, getting a call from him obviously had a lot of meaning, especially when we were pounding on doors at certain times that we couldn't get to open in the way we wanted to. So he really served a function as executive producer in the way that, we have about, I think, 745 executive producers on the music, and he served as a real one.
That's awesome.
That's great. I did check out IMDb with the new film. Brendan Fraser stars in that, right?
Brendan, actually, he's not it's Don Cheadle. Oh, so you're talking about No Sudden Move.
No Sudden Move. That's it.
Brendan Fraser's in it. He was terrific. He was great. He's a very different role than you might expect. He plays a bag man, basically a thug.
Okay.
And it's Don Cheadle and Benicio del Toro. Those are the two main characters. There's Ray Liotta. Brendan.
So you guys were really struggling for talent there. It sounds like
it's a remarkable group of actors, and it was an unbelievable experience watching them work and watching Steven work, because it's unlike any other director. First of all, he's the cinematographer and the camera operator and the editor and the director, and so you're not wasting any time. There's no standing around. There's no what they call video village, meaning there's no playback going on. There's no director's chairs where people sit. There's no small talk. It's basically you show up early and you get to work. Crew shows up at 8. The first shot's at 8:10, not 10:45 in the morning. First shot, he shoots only what he needs and he moves on. So as editor, he's picking up a piece of this scene, a piece of it there, a piece of it there. Okay, we're moving. And you're like, wait, what? And moving. So it's fast, it's cheaper. It's, you get out. Some days you're working 3, 4, 5 hours instead of 12, 13, 14 hours, It's a remarkable experience, actually.
When you work with actors, maybe depending on the director or the setting, are there actors that just have to see for themselves what's been filmed?
Even shoots what he shoots in the day, and rather than watch dailies at night, you watch a cut scene.
Okay.
He edits it. So what happens is he finishes the work, he gets the footage, he goes back to wherever we're shooting, he edits it on his computer, and when he's ready, when we were doing Mosaic, you'd come into a room and watch it, but in No Sudden Move, it was all COVID. We weren't getting to hang out in spaces. We'd just be in our hotel room. You just get a notification, hey, it's ready to be viewed on the app, on the website or wherever, and you'd watch a scene or 2 scenes.
Oh, wow.
Of that day. So
that's awesome.
So most directors take 14, 18, 20 weeks to compile a director's cut at the end of a shoot. His director's cut is available the day after you finish shooting.
That's amazing. It's
remarkable. It really is remarkable. And on No Sudden Move, it's the first time I watched a movie and I thought, I watched a rough cut of a film, because most of the time, I'm sure you guys know this, you watch a rough cut and you have to brace. It's almost like you have to put a seatbelt on and a helmet.
Sure.
To watch a rough cut, because you're like, oh God, oh God, oh God. And all you see are your flaws. And by the way, all I see when I watch anything are my flaws. That's why I don't like to watch anything that I've ever written. No Sudden Move was the first movie I watched and went, you know what? I kind of don't care if anyone else likes this, because I'm proud of this. I'm proud of it because it's beautiful to look at and the actors are great. And if you guys, so to speak, meaning people don't care for it, doesn't matter to me, because I think Steven did a beautiful job with it, to be honest, and I think the cast is great. And, people will have their opinions, and it may not be for everybody, because no movie is for anybody. It's for everybody. I mean, nobody's for anybody. Everything is for nobody. No movie's for everybody, but it's, I thought I think it's one of Don Cheadle's best performances. I think Benicio is amazing. John Hamm is wonderful in it. The women in it are fantastic. Amy Seimetz, I don't know if she pronounces it Seimetz or Seimetz, but she's great, and Julia Fox is great. Frankie Shaw is great, and Noah Jupe is in it, and he's wonderful as a young actor. It's just wonderful performances. The first time I watched it, that was my feeling. I'm really proud of this. The second time I watched it, I'm like, oh, all these great people performed a really terrible script. I feel so bad for them. That's why I can't watch my stuff, because that's where my brain goes every time.
Oh, that's a terrible curse that you have there then, because
It's a terrible, horrible.
Steven keeps working with you, so you're doing something right?
Yeah. See, I don't know what lost his mind. I don't know. Don't tell anyone. And we're starting a new thing together that we're going to do next year.
Oh, that's awesome. I can't wait to hear more about that. We'll be on the lookout for details.
I look forward to telling you about it when it's time.
I have to go back to Bill and Ted for a second, just because I have always wanted to know what was going through your mind and what it was like to experience once Bill and Ted started taking off, and there was like the cartoon and the cereal and the action figures. What was it like to be part of that process and just be like, okay, I guess have we created the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? I mean, what's going on here? Like,
Chris and I never thought people would even read the script, right? So the idea that it caught on was like playing with house money. It was crazy. And the cartoon I didn't really have anything to do with. There was a TV show that I fucking hated. Chris and I wanted to be involved until they heard our ideas, and then they basically fired us before even hiring us on it.
Wow.
And so I couldn't I watched like 5 minutes of a TV show, and I went, oh my God, I can't watch this. So I don't really know what the show was, but I didn't like it. That was a weird feeling, you know? And I've experienced that on a few things where like you create something and then someone else takes it and does something with it. And sometimes they do stuff that's better, but sometimes it's like, what the hell? And it really bummed me out. The TV show bummed me out, really, really bummed me out. The cartoon I heard was pretty good, but I just couldn't watch it. There were comic books that Evan Dorkin did that I heard were great.
oh, yep.
I looked through some of them and I thought, this guy's great. He's imaginative. He's interesting. But I didn't get too deep into them because it just, I don't know, it raised feelings in me that I just didn't want to have. But I like his work a lot. And he did the recent comic book.
Yeah.
And we met for a drink and he was telling me his ideas. And I'm like, dude, this all sounds great. Go for it. And he's like, do you want to like contribute? And I was like, no, it's your world. You're doing this world, but you have my blessing. I love the energy you're putting into it. I love the passion you have for it. And he's like, okay, great. And I approve of, appreciate, am grateful for, all of those things, but I don't put my energy into it because I can't, it's too much. I don't know why. I have to, my brain can't process all that stuff.
That's interesting about Evan Dorkin, who, friend of the show, love the guy, but he does a great job with him.
He's an extremely talented guy.
Yeah, super talented. It's also fascinalike that he's never seen the first movie either, So like,
that's hilarious.
He's never
More
seen
power to him.
But like
that's beautiful. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love that.
That's in print somewhere else. So I haven't ratted him out. But
keeps his vision pure.
It does. So. But yeah,
God bless him. You know what I mean? That and living in Staten Island are the two things that if that's you got, good for you.
Yep.
No, I like him a lot, and I the stuff I have seen of his, like the stuff he's shown me, I'm like, dude, that's great. That's like great stuff. And it's its own universe, it's a sort of separate universe. And like the things that to me are the most moving are like, yes, let's like putting that Evan stuff aside. Cause like Evan stuff is terrific. I hated the TV show. As we've said, I thought it was a very, very bad misunderstanding of what Bill and Ted were. Very surface and very crass. But to, Kelly, to your question, or maybe it was yours, Jason, I don't remember, but it was, what does it feel like to have like people doing Bill and Ted or Bill and Ted cosplay or fan art or that is probably the most meaningful, like most moving part of my career is that Chris and I created something on a lark, really, because of our friendship and because of something that made us laugh and these characters that we cared about. It really was created not to cash in. I've made almost no money on Bill and Ted including Face the Music, for 35 years now, almost no money. I mean, I've made money, but the equivalent of $15,000 a year. You know, I mean, that's money. That's real money.
More than Men in Black, probably. I'm just joking.
No,
about it.
well, I haven't made money on I've made no net profits on
Yes,
Men in Black,
yeah.
but I have made more residuals on Men in Black. Men in Black has paid me much more than Bill and Ted on the long run, for sure. I mean, I've made money on Bill and Ted for sure over the years, but not like that much. And Bill and Ted was never for the money. But the most meaningful thing for me is the way it has landed with certain people and the fan base of it. And the fight to get Face the Music made was a fight to let it exist for the people for whom it meant something. It meant a lot to us. If I were to sort of create concentric circles about like why we made that movie and who I wanted to please, me, Chris, Alex, Keanu, Dean, Scott Kroof in the inner circle, that was like the original team. Like, let's make a movie we are proud of. That was the first circle. But then the second circle, and the reason that I was so stressed when it looked like it was going to fall apart, was the second circle, which was the people who had loved Bill and Ted, the people who had seen the movie a bunch of times. Those were the reasons the movie got made in the first place, Face the Music. And that was why we were willing to give our money back to production, why when it looked like it was going to fall apart, we fought like crazy to get it, like do whatever we could, reduce the budget, put our money back into the movie, cut the days, do whatever we could, because I didn't want to let those people down. And the pressure I haven't felt on anything. The pressure to not just get the movie made, but to make it at least good enough to validate the affection of the people who, or ennoble or dignify. What's the word I'm looking for? Like to make something worthy of the people who had fought for to get it made, to make it worthy of the fans that loved the movie. Because I never haven't had an experience on a film. I've written a lot of movies that have been so-called hits or successful or had sequels, but never that had the kind of fan base or the deep, like Bill and Ted doesn't have a wide fan base. It's not like popular wide. Like Men in Black was a widely popular film, and it was a pop film, and I'm proud of the movie. It was a successful film, and I think Barry Sonnenfeld did a great job, and Will and Tommy were great, and I'm not dissing that movie at all, but it still didn't have that. Bill and Ted has a not wide, but deep fan base. And those people mean the world to me, and they feel like family to me. And I know that's weird, but they embraced these characters that we didn't have a lot of other support for at great times, and still don't. To be totally honest, I mean, it's still perceived as weird, and like half the people are like, "What the fuck? Like, that is the stupidest shit I have ever seen in my life." And you know what? It's like, thankfully now, I don't care. But like, for a long time, it was hard. When the first movie came out and got trashed, it was really hard. It was really painful, like brutally painful, because I couldn't understand why serious critics hated Bill and Ted so much that they would not just trash it in their review of Bill and Ted, but weeks later they'd trash it in reviews of other movies. There was a guy from the LA Times, like a third string critic from the LA Times, who reviewed Bill and Ted, and he also reviewed Jason, one of the Friday the 13th movies. It was Jason Takes Manhattan. And I remember him going, "Hey, here's an idea." And it was not even a review for Bill. It was a review of Jason, of Friday the 13th. He's like, "How about Jason Takes Bill and Ted?" And I was like, "That's not even a review of our movie. We're already dead. You've already killed us. We're on the ground. You don't have to keep stabbing us. That was 2 weeks ago. Leave us alone. That hurts. Stop." I was too young. It was too painful.
But you know what? the world's come around. We did an entire show with Noel Murray, a film critic of some renown, and we went over some of the old reviews and some of the re-reviews. And I mean, it's universally beloved. There are some people that are just never going to get it, but there is a ton of people now who might not have at the first. And this third film, just real quick, you guys did stick the landing. It was just better than Kelly and I could have hoped for. It just loved it.
Well, I was going to say, I know you guys did not set out to make a film during a pandemic, right? Or release a film during a pandemic. You know, you wanted people in theaters and in seats, but there was something really poetic about that film and the release and the timing. Seeing Be Excellent to Each Other come back around again on marquees of, around New York City, and just the love with all of that. I mean, what we're talking about here is just the whole basis for our podcast even existing. So,
honestly, thank you guys so much for saying that. I mean, it is weird when I've seen some of the photos of those marquees. Chris makes fun of me all the time because I get super weepy, but when I see those marquees that say "Be Excellent to Each Other," I literally weep. I can't fucking believe that we did that. That like this little thing from Ships, so long ago, this little thing that we didn't even think about, like is now sticking on a marquee during a pandemic. The idea, nobody is lucky that there was a pandemic. It's screwed everybody up, and this is a whole other subject, of course.
Sure.
But the movie. Look, it messed up a lot of our ability to do it in post, obviously, as it did with a lot of movies. We had to make a lot of sacrifices and compromises everyone on the planet had to do. But I didn't mind that it wasn't in theaters. I didn't mind that. It seemed like a kind of movie you could watch with your family. It was like okay with me. I felt bad that it cost so much money when it came out. I was like, why are you charging people like $29 to buy it? Can't you make it cheaper for people? But there was some deal with, there's all that theatrical stuff and whatever. We obviously don't have any control over that. But the fact that the movie, like you were saying, it got revisited in the cultural memory. It has been kind of resurrected in a way. It was despised by the so-called serious critics early. The second movie, which didn't hold up as well. The script wasn't as good. We messed up the last third of the second movie of Bogus Journey, but it got better reviews than the first movie. And I think at first, when it first came out, I think now in hindsight, it doesn't have as good reviews because I think that the first movie was relooked at a bit. But one of the things that I'm most grateful for about having Face the Music, having worked, and to that we owe not just Keanu and Alex, who of course were partners beyond partners, just they are Bill and Ted. Mm-hmm. But also Dean. I mean, Dean made a movie that I'm proud of. He with very limited resources, and that credit goes to Scott Kroof, goes to Alex Leibovich, who was one of the other producers, goes to the whole crew, obviously the whole cast, all the folks. But what happened was, because Face the Music happened, what had started as this weird youthful lark that was basically a reflection of Chris and my adolescence, basically, became a life work. And it became like this gift of no matter what happens, and regardless of the money or lack of money, or that's so not important. What it became was a piece of work that expanded my whole life. That's weird and nice, never expected that ever. And when you say that about sticking the landing, I can't tell you what that means. When I hear you say something like the movie worked for you, it makes me feel so fucking grateful that we got it made, because it almost didn't happen. And it was literally for people like you guys, like people for whom the movies meant something. And I often think, so much of my work, or the work of any writer, you're just in a room alone, like for sometimes years. You're working on stuff, it doesn't get made. You write another thing, it doesn't get made. Look at Face the Music, it took us 12 years to get it made. So you don't usually have a relationship with the people for whom you're writing it. So you find yourself just writing it for yourself because you realize that statistically every day is basically spent by yourself. So when you say that, it actually makes me think, holy shit, there's a voice on the other end, or there's let's say an ear on the other end that heard the scream across the chasm, that it wasn't just an echo. It was like another human. So that's really super meaningful. Maybe I'm getting maudlin. Maybe I've had one too many glasses of wine on this podcast.
Cheers.
My apologies. Cheers. Yeah, oh, good. I'm glad. I don't feel so alone. Anyone who's listened this far and who hasn't turned it off, thank you. And I apologize for being so fucking maudlin. I have had probably one glass of wine today.
Oh, I think there's a single tear coming down all of our listeners' eyes.
Exactly. A single tear. A clown who cries. That's what I want to be. A clown who cries. That I want to be that original. Yeah. Oh, Jesus. Don't send me this podcast. I don't want to listen to it. Please.
Fair enough.
We'll title it. Ed will never hear this.
Yeah, thank you. And, literally, don't let me block me. Block me on your Twitter. Do everything to make it impossible.
Oh man. One last thing I want to thank you for on the last film. I have an 8-year-old daughter, and because I'm her father, she loves Bill and Ted because she's a good daughter. But when we went to the drive-in and I showed her Face the Music, I'd watched it a couple times, and she's just a little blonde girl, 8 years old, and she saw Thea up there and was just gobsmacked. And at the end of it, she's like, "Daddy, I can save the world." And I'm like, "Of course you can, honey." And it was just great for her to see.
Here come the waterworks now.
But I'm just like,
I know.
I'm sorry, but
now you're going to get me even more maudlin. Just when you thought Ed couldn't get more maudlin. Dude, that means everything to me. I honestly, thank you so much for saying that. And please, God, God bless it, and honestly, Sam and Bridget, we owe so much to them and their courage and what they did to this movie, for this movie. That is remarkable. And thank you for telling me that. And thank you for showing it to your daughter. And God dang it, that is amazing. That is just amazing. I'm not going to get more maudlin. I'm going to stop.
Perfect. That's fair. One last question, because I'm going down the, oh my God, I'm getting to talk to Ed Solomon. What are some
bucket list?
Yeah,
bucket
list questions. So we know that the original, well, not the original, but while filming, one of the endings of the script was in the classroom, and then it was decided to do the big presentation in the auditorium. There was also a prom scene. When was the decision made to change that last scene from the classroom presentation to the iconic auditorium stage show, which just really sealed the deal for the movie? And then also, any insight into what was in the prom scene?
I'll try to remember what's in the prom scene because that was original, right?
Yep.
But I'll see if I can remember it. But here's an area where I was very wrong. I really thought all these great historical figures filing into a little classroom would have this deep emotional impact. And I fought for it. And I was wrong. I was totally wrong. It also relied on the relationship that we'd set up in the script between Bill and Ted and these other characters from the high school that got cut out of the movie. Randolph, Biff, Jody, Ox, Buffy, all these characters. And how much they despised Bill and Ted. I thought that when Bill and Ted showed them up by bringing actual Abraham Lincoln and actual Genghis Khan and, et cetera, into the classroom, that would have this deep emotional impact. But it felt very puny when we screened it. And it was anticlimactic. And others had said it needs to be bigger, and I fought them, and I was wrong. So it was a reshoot. It was additional footage that was shot after we had finished the movie. So that's where the so-called, the iconic, as you said, the big so-called concert. And I remember even Scott Kroof, who was producing it and who produced Face the Music and who produced Bogus Journey. I remember Scott actually saying during the reshoot, we got these, I don't forget what they were called, but they were these certain lights that were used they were the sort of cutting edge concert lights at the time. Mm-hmm. And I remember on set having to write some of the jokes, some of which I think are decent and some I think are passable and not great, that I remember writing. That's how that one got shot. The prom scene,
Because there's a whole scene in Excellent Adventure where they write the poem, which I do like the poem of "Oh, you beautiful babes from England, for whom we have traveled through time, will you go to the prom with us in San Dimas? We will have a most triumphant time." The idea that Bill and Ted rhymed time with time, I always found very amusing.
Yep.
And I remember Chris and I laughing a lot writing that moment. But they went to the prom. They went and got them and brought them to the prom. These princesses from medieval England, that got cut out. For whatever reason, I guess I don't know why. That was like, we thought that was the most emotional ending. We thought, the classroom and then the prom, but I guess when we screened it or they screened it or it got screened for an audience, it just didn't land for people. So it became like big concert ending. And then on Bogus Journey, I'm pretty sure we reshot the ending of that one too, to make it a bigger concert ending. So then by Face the Music, it's like, I guess we end these movies with a big concert. That's just what you do in a Bill and Ted movie, right. I guess. Yeah. Let's avoid reshooting the ending. And by the way, we intended to add, we had more things. We actually saved money to do additional footage. We actually planned to add some scenes to Face the Music that because of COVID, we couldn't do anyway.
Wow.
So, but we figured we might have to reshoot or at least do additional footage, but we never got to. So
we had heard that in Face the Music, you guys were maybe going to have a scene where you revisited the Circle K, but that got cut.
One of my very favorite scenes in this drafts that got cut was, there was a couple things about it that I really loved. During the downward trajectory where Bill and Ted in Face the Music are basically realizing that the more forward they go in their life, the worse their life is. They decide, well, maybe we should go back. Maybe we should go back to when we were young. And there were two scenes that were cut. One was Bill and Ted go back and see themselves as like 9 or 10-year-olds. And Missy is their babysitter. She's in high school.
Nice.
And they go back to tell themselves to get on the right track. And what I loved about the scene was they're basically berating their young selves, saying, don't screw anything up, do everything right, be perfect and save the world. And it was like the absolute last thing that a 9-year-old would want to hear, right? Or could understand. It was like two crazy old guys going, be perfect, never screw anything up, So that was that scene that we ended up cutting because it was a little bit overlapping of the scene where they go back to try to save their own marriages and end up making it worse. We thought, like, we only have the money and time to shoot one of these. It's more important to be with the princesses, the wives that we don't want to lose. We're already losing so much of that storyline because of the budget cuts that we want to preserve as much as we can. So we got rid of the 9-year-old one. The second scene that we cut, which was cut for a slightly different reason, which was my favorite Bill and Ted scene that we lost, was they go, well, maybe that 9-year-old's is too early. When did it all change for us? Let's go to that moment. And so they go visit themselves at the Circle K and they land. So you have middle-aged, 50-year-old or whatever, Bill and Ted land at the Circle K and see their 17-year-old selves at the moment that the other 17-year-old versions of them land and change everything and say, you guys are going to have this excellent adventure through time. And the idea was, in our dream, we would find unused footage from dailies from the first movie, and we would use it and cut in that footage with Alex and Keanu, present day Alex and Keanu, so that we could actually use unused footage. We couldn't find any unused footage. That was one problem. So that meant we were stuck with the footage from the original movie. And the idea was we were going to have Bill and Ted interact with their younger selves, and we had written a whole scene that I really had liked, where current Bill says to Ted, go talk to yourself, go tell, find out and tell yourself. And current Ted, who's very depressed because his life isn't going the way, he wants it to go. He shows up to younger Ted, played by, young 20-year-old playing 17-year-old Keanu Reeves. And it was going to be, hey, and young Ted, and Ted says, I always thought that was my depressing old Uncle Ted. And so he shows up and he's like, hey, and he's trying to talk to young Ted, but he just ends up making him even more depressed. And at the end, he just says, I'm Uncle Ted. Like, I'm not even you, I'm just your old Uncle Ted, and walks away. And it's like, well, that didn't work. That was the idea behind the scene. And they were going to have a moment. And this was the meaningful thing for me with George. There was going to be a moment where they talked to Rufus. But because we only had the footage from the first movie, it would have required us to do all this like digital bullshit.
Star Wars kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Right?
And the problem there was what was going to be an homage to George Carlin was going to end up being a digital kind of uncanny valley mess up. And was like, that's the last thing we want to do.
Right.
We don't have the money or time or footage to do this well. So let's not do it at all. Because the last thing we want to do is mess with the guy we're trying to honor, you know?
Sure.
And that is why ultimately we cut it. It just because it wasn't going to work well. And if it wasn't going to work well, it wasn't worth doing. So that's why we cut it.
Where you guys landed in the third film with the homage to George Carlin was pretty great. It came off with the right amount of respect, and you didn't have to worry about like, oh God, they tried to do it's zombie George Carlin. You didn't have to worry about it. So it worked out
I'm
really
grateful
well.
to hear you say that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. You know what? I was worried that we didn't do enough. I was actually worried. At the end of the day, at least we got it in, but I really wanted the movie to recognize how much he meant to us because he meant so much to us, you know? And I mean, he and Kelly was in the movie, and that's why we named Kristen Shaw's character Kelly. Kelly is George Carlin's daughter, for those of you who don't know. But I mean, we did not want to diminish that at all, you know? I appreciate that you said that, but like, that was a bummer, you know, that we wanted to make sure whatever we did, that we didn't blow it.
You didn't blow it.
I wasn't leaving it there so you didn't say that.
No.
The proposal scene in Bogus Journey, Bill and Ted, it just cracks me up every time. Kelly and I have had endless conversations, theoretical conversations about this. Did Bill and Ted write those together, or are their brains in such harmony that they both went for the same metaphors, but different ecosystems?
Absolutely the latter.
Okay, all right.
There you go.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes.
That's what he wanted to hear, for sure.
Absolutely 100% the latter.
This podcast has been worth it. I can sleep tonight.
Guys, you've been amazing, and I know that it's taken a while to get us all on the same like time zone to be able to do this. I'm really grateful that I got to do this, and thank you. Not only thank you for having me, but thank you for having this podcast, period. And whoever's listening, thank you for even staying on this long and being still a part of this.
We couldn't have done it without you.
Literally.
And by the way, and I really mean it, and the same is true vice versa. Truly, we wouldn't have got Face the Music made if it wasn't for people like you and the people that would listen to this thing. So seriously, it would not have happened. So honestly, it goes right back at you.
You've made this a beautiful bookend that we sort of started this with Chris, and we're ending it with you, though we are leaving the door open for Keanu if he's out there and ever wants to call in. But no, it's really just it's a nice bookend to what's been a fun couple of years for us. And the fact that we started this before the third movie was ever announced, and then it happened while we were doing this, has made it even sweeter. So
it's really an honor to be on, and really a pleasure to see you guys in person, or not in person. I guess what counts is in person today, but see you guys face to quote face. And, thank you guys a ton, and let's hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Thanks, Ed. We
great.
really appreciate your time, and thank you so much. It's been an honor.
My pleasure. Thank you, and thanks for thank you so much for having me.
I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say.
Man. Okay, not only did we get such great insight into Bill and Ted, but I never dreamed I would have gotten to talk to a guy who like knew Gary Shandling and like really worked with him, and like that to me is like coming home. That's just like something I've always wanted to talk to somebody about, and what an added bonus.
I really appreciated his honesty. His frustrations as a young person, like landing his first gig so quick like that, and then having to regroup, getting the boost from Gary, and then, soldiering forward, man.
Yeah. Oh, man. And
what a career.
I know.
What a career.
What a career. And what about his honesty, talking about the end of the original Bill and Ted, and how he was the one that was wrong, and, he was fighting for the original ending that was eventually changed. Just so fascinating. So fascinating. And I have to wonder if a little bit of that is like him being so gracious and falling on a sword and not like letting anybody else take but man, just So great.
If there's one thing we've learned, it's like what a collaborative process making a movie is.
Especially these movies.
Yeah. And everyone we've talked to, man, they've all been incredible. The effort, the time that went into these films, the love, it's just so evident on screen, all three of them.
It is. It really is. It really is. I'm struck by the parallels between the first and the third, especially the making of both of them. You know, the second one had more money, had a little bit more support, even though it seemed like nobody at the time really believed in it. Interesting side note, AV Club a couple of weeks ago, maybe the past week before, did a series on better sequels. And the whole hypothesis of that was that Bogus Journey was the best of the trilogy.
Oh, interesting.
It is interesting because, I mean, coming into this, it was my favorite, right? But to see, somebody go back and reassess these things, just fascinating to see that in digital ink.
Yeah, and we've known this, but to hear it from Ed, talk about Bogus Journey and how they did, they ran out of money, they rushed the ending, it wasn't what they wanted, they didn't think it was as good as it could have been. It was really kind of refreshing, to hear, a writer really talk about that, because the funding for films is hard. It's really, really hard. Maybe that's my biggest takeaway.
Right. And it's getting harder too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've read about how these epic tentpole movies and the Marvels are soaking up all the funds, and everybody's putting all their money in a big pot to get a big reward. Nobody's making mid films, independent films barely get any funding, so it's got to be a work of love. And it's weird that Face the Music ended up almost being an indie film, right? I mean, it had some backing, but
right. And obviously, talked a lot about Steven Soderbergh and how he really helped rescue the film in a way, I guess.
Yeah.
And what a fruitful relationship. They did that Mosaic show on HBO, which I don't think I quite caught if that led to the Bill and Ted, or if that...
I think that was the grounding for a relationship between them.
Right.
And then they've been working together. And I think this latest film that he talked about, it's coming out
right.
While they were working there. So,
Gotcha.
I mean, what a great relationship and a great thing. So thanks, Steven. Appreciate it.
So, yeah, you and I are sitting here looking at each other. We knew coming in here that this would probably be the last episode of DIMAS Today. We definitely want to throw it out there that we keep the door open to come back one day.
Yeah.
And, in no small measure, that's leaving it open for you, Keanu Reeves. But for all intents and purposes, we're putting an incredible bow on top of all of this.
Yeah, man. I couldn't be happier. When you and I started talking about ideas for a podcast, this one just seemed so natural for us. But it was really just going to be you and I, talking about the movies. We had recurring segments that we wanted to do, right?
Right? Like go into a song, a different song from the soundtrack each episode. I think that lasted for 2 episodes.
It did. Also, talking about merch, right? So, we were going to talk about different merch stuff.
The cereal.
Man, yeah. I was never able to get anybody to talk to me about Purina cereals. I had looked up some articles and tried to find journalists who had talked about how Purina had done cereals. Nobody would call me back.
For our listeners, Jason was getting really deep on people that he wanted to interview for this thing.
Hey.
We were going maybe 3-4 layers into Bill and Ted fandom, deeper than I ever thought we would go.
I regret nothing, man. Listen, we were able to use this show to interview Noel Murray, right? Who's a personal favorite of ours. And the fact that we were able to connect that into this. Oh,
yeah. Comic legend Evan Dorkin.
Oh,
right?
Man.
We could have talked to that guy for hours. What were maybe your top 2 or 3 moments during this podcast? Maybe not greatest moments, maybe intense moments.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe terrible moments. I don't know what you're thinking.
Okay, so let me tell you what, this is tangentially related to the show, but something that happened to me that only would have happened because of this show. When I introduced my daughter to Bill and Ted, the very first time, I videotaped her while she watched Napoleon at Waterloops, right? And she just cracked up and laughed, and I was able to send that video to Terry Camilleri. And he wrote back, he was like, thank you so much. That just warms my heart. And I'm like, yes, being able to share that moment with that guy who brought me so much joy and is bringing my daughter so much joy, and like just trying to feed it back to him.
Man, the Terry interview, it was going to be right up there for me, maybe for slightly different reasons. That seemed like the first, just most comfortable interview we did. Was that the second or third interview?
It might have been. It was the third, because the second we lost. We lost the second episode. So first one, Chris Matheson, which was amazing.
Yep.
That guy, like, I'd reached out to him, and I'm like, hey, I'm Jason. I'm doing this podcast. And we hadn't broadcast at all, and I put my telephone number in there. And I'm at work, and I get this call. It's like, hey, this is Chris Matheson. I'm like, shut the... it was...
Yeah.
I was taken aback. And then I had a nice conversation with him. He agreed to be interviewed. We did the interview. It's just so gracious, so cool. And we found out so much stuff about the early version.
Dog
of
Rufus?
Yeah.
Dog Rufus.
Yeah.
Of course, then we interviewed the costume director,
Jill O'Hannison, and... Phenomenal interview. Couldn't have gone better in every way, every facet. We learned so much in that interview about how costume design plays together with production design, how they're constantly collaborating, moving. We also learned a lot about the filming of the original Bill and Ted, because she talked about going over to Europe, what that was like, costuming everyone. It was just amazing. And then we hung up the phone with her. We were high-fiving, and then the digital was just corrupted. We had no audio of it.
Yeah. And it hurt a little bit, but that's what happens in this business, folks.
Yeah.
When you're a podcaster, sometimes those files will get corrupted.
It's just terrible.
It happened to Mark Maron the other month. If it's still happening to him, I think we're doing okay.
Yeah, I think we'll be all right. So that was a bummer. But
then Terry.
Yeah, but then Terry.
And... that one was neat, because that was the first one that he actually got on video, because we were Skyping him from Australia. And he was on video the whole time, even though we were on audio. And I was looking at him the whole time. And I don't know what it was. I mean, man, it's hard to pick. I think Sadler has maybe the greatest performance in the entire trilogy. But I don't know how you rank it over Napoleon either. And that conversation, we learned about how much of that was improv that he did.
Yeah.
And it just made it that much better.
It did. I mean, you got the holy trinity, right, of the B-plot guys in Bill and Ted who just stealing the show. Napoleon, phenomenal. Death, phenomenal. Dennis Caleb McCoy, phenomenal.
Yep.
Like all three of them. What these writers did was they gave heart to each of these characters, and it shows through in all three movies.
Yeah. And to hear the guy who was doing it talk about what a great time it was, to talk about that day at the water park, filming the Waterloo scene. And he just seemed like such a cool guy that, we kind of ended the whole thing like, hey, if you're in Nashville, let's have a beer.
And speaking of having a beer with somebody who's ever in Nashville, Jonathan Leahy.
Right.
I mean, just great, right?
That's just like, that felt like sitting down with a guy we should probably be friends with,
I mean, we wish we were cool enough.
Yeah, we wish we were cool enough, but it's fine.
We learned so much about the process, and it's a process of making films that I had never really considered or realized how much thought went into it. And it's like you're almost directing this, like a fourth of the film yourself, right? I mean, everything's got to be approved by the director, but the work he did with the soundtrack and the orchestration and like putting together the final song, right?
Right. It seems like such a high pressure job. And, I think it said a lot when we interviewed Alex Winter after Jonathan, who said just as much. It's like, man, that guy had a really hard job.
Right. Right.
And he stuck the landing.
Yeah. We got to talk to Alex.
Yeah, right.
About Frank Zappa.
Yeah. I mean, look, that was a 14-minute blur. I don't really even remember it. I just remember just kind of looking at him on the computer. I don't know. It's it's just that level of fandom or starstruck or something. It doesn't happen to me much. Yeah.
Dr. Amy Stock.
Two interviews.
She was gracious enough to come
our
back.
only repeat interviewee.
Yeah.
So,
but that first one was so enlightening and just so interesting to hear about her career and her life, and like struggle she's had going on now. And it's just so gracious with her time, so open and honest, and just, oh man, I'm tearing up here, Kelly.
No. I mean, so Laura Shapiro, who, we thought we were the biggest Bill and Ted fans until we talked to her.
I mean, like, I really thought she was going to be our big get, like the person closest to the center of the universe, like who had the most knowledge about the production of Face the Music, especially. And man, the book is great. I love the book, and just getting to talk to her about her career, how she got started, how she got involved in writing that book, how she's been a script consultant, and how she's involved in all these things. Just fascinating.
How she's going to find those missing scenes.
Yes.
I mean, she is the ambassador of Bill and Ted.
Yeah, she is. She absolutely is. I mean, just so fortunate to be able to speak to her. And everybody, man. Everybody.
Yeah.
You know what?
I mean, we haven't even talked about William Sadler.
William Sadler. We talked to William Sadler. I enjoyed the shows when we had local musicians in, right?
Yeah.
Like, that was so fun.
Right.
So
When we had Mike and Cody in the room.
Yeah.
We had Becky Delius here.
Yeah.
That was a great episode.
First time viewer.
Yeah. And that's always nice.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
I love converting folks,
Yeah.
And like even at work last week, I incorporated Bill and Ted into my presentation, and I can only hope that got HBO Max some extra views of Bill and Ted over the weekend.
Let's hope so. I'll say one other thing that really, really got me doing the show. When we were doing the show, and in the middle of doing the show, they announced that Face the Music had been greenlit and they were going to start production. That was just so neat.
Yeah. Right? I mean, look, hardcore fans, we've known that the script's been out there for years, but there was nothing indicating that this thing was going to happen, when it did.
Right.
We always joke that, we credit ourselves in the podcast for that really happening.
I'm not joking. I am not joking.
Obviously, we know it had a lot more to do with finding the money.
Yeah.
But, one thing I think we could probably talk a little bit about is that, we hope to not be going away when it comes to podcasting, and hopefully in such a way where if you're subscribing to this podcast, you're going to find out about what we're going to do next.
Yep.
We're going to keep it a little under wraps until we get it a little bit more worked out. This will hopefully be a fruitful partnership that will continue.
No, I'm sick of you, man. We're done. We are done.
I just want to be your Steven Soderbergh. I just don't have enough money.
Well, get crack-a-lackin', buddy. Let's do this. No, Kelly, this has really been the greatest honor to go on this journey with you, man.
Yeah.
It's just been so wonderful. And, I mean, obviously we can't thank Michael Leeds, our producer, enough.
Yeah. I mean, he, given a platform to two guys with a silly idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I can appreciate that. And of course, Michael, he is a true ambassador of creative arts here in Nashville. He runs a record label. He runs the best podcast network in town.
Handsome beard.
He's got a lot going for him.
Yeah.
I think he's gonna make it in this world.
We'll see. It's touch and go. But we're rooting for him. Thanks to Scott Bricklin.
Scott Bricklin. Let's talk about Scott Bricklin.
Let's talk about Scott Bricklin.
He's graciously let us use that song. And with this podcast, we haven't made a dime of advertising money. So sorry about that, Scott.
We've not made a dime of any money, actually. The amount of money I've spent sending buttons and stickers to England is kind of astonishing, but totally worth it. So,
yep. And you know what? We do have some buttons. We do have some prints left. Maybe we'll figure something out on the interwebs to try and get some more of that stuff to listeners who want it.
Yeah. I mean, just clogging up our junk drawers at this point. So
That's right. Those Andy Vastag prints aren't going to sell themselves.
No, but those things are glorious. That is a really handsome poster. And hey, and thanks to Andy for actually doing that for us, right?
Yeah. Supported the great artists. The Bill and Ted Day that we had. It was fantastic.
Man.
And we hope to keep doing that once it's safe again. I think we've earned our right to throw a Bill and Ted Day party every year here in Nashville.
I think so. Even if it's just you and I watching Bill and Ted.
Sure.
Yeah, but we're going to do it. No one's going to stop us unless I'm busy that day. And then
Oh man, it's great that finally this last episode we can just ramble more than we've ever rambled before.
Because you know what? Nobody's listening.
I might not even edit this. I might not even edit this.
There's no point. There's no point. Take out that portion where we talk about, and then we're good.
Man. JT, I don't really know what else to say other than be excellent to each other.
Party on, dudes!
You can edit it to whatever you want, and you don't need to run it by me afterwards. Just do whatever you want with it.
Okay.
I just wanted to get the parameters. Would you prefer me to not swear?
No, you can swear.
You can swear.
Okay. Would you prefer me to put pants on? Because I can do that.
It's audio only.
Yeah.
Follow your
good.
Follow your
It works
bliss. Yeah,
well.
follow your
All right.
bliss. Follow your bliss.
But you know,
All right, perfect.
we'll keep the video just for us. You know.
Yeah, no, of course. That's for you. This is for you. This is our private. Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool.
Can we start recording?
Yeah, let's start recording.
He is wearing pants.
I know you lied. You lied. That fucker. That fucking asshole. He lied. He made a joke. He lied for a joke.
Oh,
God
great.
damn it.
That's great.
I was revealed.